This PowerPoint is to show the process of muscle contraction and the 4 types of muscle contractions that happen in the body. On this slide, you can see an overview of the process of muscle contraction, starting with the stimulus and ending with the end of contraction. The first stage of the contraction is the stimulus. First off, there is a stimulus in the environment, e.g. a ball coming towards you. Your eyes then see this stimulus, and because it is a sensory organ, your sensory neurons send a signal to the brain. Your brain then sends these signals down the motor neurons. The second stage is getting the message to the muscle fibers. The impulse is sent down from the brain via the motor neurons. The impulse then reaches the synapse, which is then sent from the neurotransmitters, which is the ACH, across the synapse to the receptor sites. If enough impulse has been sent across the neuromuscular transmitter, the impulse will continue to travel across the muscle fibre, down the T-tubules and to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, where the calcium is stored. The calcium is then released. When the muscles are at rest, they become energized. This is because of the ATP being broken down, which consequently releases energy. The troponin and tropomyosin at this stage are covering the actin binding sites. As you can see from the image below, the tropomyosin is what is covering the myosin binding site, and the troponin is on top of that. For the muscle fibers to contract, the calcium ions attach to the troponin and changes its shape, which displaces the tropomyosin and uncovers the actin binding site. The energized myosin arm then attaches to the actin binding site and pulls it towards the M line, creating a sliding motion and bringing the Z lines in towards the M line, causing the muscle to shorten and then contract. The myosin arm will then need more ATP in order to detach from the actin binding site and relax. For the muscle fibers to sustain contraction, they need ATP for energy, but they also need constant impulses to be sent to the sarcoplasmic reticulum so that calcium ions are released, which then uncovers the actin binding site. The last stage of a muscle contraction is ending the contraction. The impulse has now been stopped and is not being sent to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which will stop releasing calcium ions, which means that the troponin and tropomyosin will return to their original shape and position, therefore covering up the actin binding site again. Next, we move on to the 4 types of muscle contractions: concentric, eccentric, isometric, and isokinetic. Concentric and eccentric are both types of isotonic contractions. This is when the muscle changes length due to contractions. Concentric contractions are contractions that cause the muscle to shorten when the muscle is contracted. This is the most common type of contraction. An example is the bending of the elbow, like when doing a bicep curl. There is concentric contraction at the bicep brachii as shown in the image. Eccentric contractions are the opposite to concentric contractions, as the muscle lengthens when it is contracted. This is less common than the concentric contractions. An example of this is the straightening at the elbow due to the bicep curl. This image below shows eccentric contraction at the bicep brachii. During isometric contraction, there is no change in the length of the muscle as it contracts. It occurs when you are carrying an object in front of you, and as the weight of the object is pulling your arms down, your muscles have to contract to keep the object level. An example of this is when you are holding a badminton racket out in front of you when you are defending, as your muscles are having to contract to keep them up and in the right position. The last contraction is the isokinetic contraction. This is very similar to the isotonic contractions, except it produces a movement of a constant speed. To measure the isokinetic contraction, an isokinetic dynamometer is used. An example of when this is used is during breaststroke in swimming, where the water provides a constant, even resistance to the movement of adduction. That is all for today. Thank you for listening.